Right now, somewhere on Earth, someone is holding smoke inside their lungs on purpose, doing it deliberately, for the feeling, for the ritual, for the habit. And here's the part that should stop you cold. They are not doing anything new. Not remotely. Humans have been deliberately inhaling smoke from burning plants for so long that we genuinely don't know when it started. We only know it's much, much older than anyone assumed. And the answer involves a campfire in the Utah desert, a cemetery on the roof of the world, a plant most people have never heard of, and a discovery that quietly rewrote the timeline by tens of thousands of years. So, when did humans actually start smoking? Not drinking tea from a plant, not chewing a leaf, smoking, inhaling combusted plant matter on purpose for the effect it produces. Buckle up, because the story is weirder than you think. Let's start with what smoking actually requires, biologically speaking. Fire. Humans have controlled fire for at least 1 million years, possibly longer, depending on which contested archaeological site you believe. And the second fire enters the picture. Plants start burning near people, constantly, accidentally, incidentally. Which means the real question was never, did smoke exist around early humans? Of course it did. The real question is, when did a human first look at burning plant matter and think, I want that smoke inside me, specifically, on purpose, for a reason? That's a completely different threshold. That's not proximity to smoke. That's intent. And for a long time, historians assumed that threshold was recent, comfortably recent, a few thousand years old at most, tied cleanly to the domestication of tobacco in the Americas. Simple story. Convenient story. Also, as it turns out, wrong. In 2021, archaeologists working at the Wishbone site in Utah published something that should have made bigger headlines than it did. Buried in a hearth, a literal ancient fire pit, they found 4 charred wild tobacco seeds. Carbon dating placed them at approximately 12,300 years old. That is not a typo. 12,300 years. For context, that predates the invention of pottery in most of the world. It predates farming almost everywhere on the planet. It predates the pyramids by roughly 9,000 years. Now, seeds alone don't prove smoking. Seeds could mean someone was eating tobacco, chewing it, using it medicinally. So archaeologists had to ask a harder question. Why would wild tobacco seeds end up specifically inside a fire pit mixed with charcoal, alongside evidence of duck bones and stone tools consistent with a hunting camp? The leading interpretation, and it's a compelling one, is that the plant was being burned deliberately, likely smoked or used in the fire itself, not just gathered as food. Which means humans in North America may have had an intentional relationship with tobacco smoke almost as soon as humans were in North America at all. Let that sit for a second. Tobacco wasn't discovered by later, more sophisticated cultures who figured out a clever new use for a plant. It may have been one of the very first things migrating humans identified, tested, and incorporated almost immediately into their behavior. Not agriculture, not architecture, smoke. So why tobacco specifically? Here's where the biology gets genuinely interesting. Wild tobacco contains nicotine, a stimulant and mild psychoactive compound that affects the central nervous system almost instantly when inhaled through smoke. Unlike eating a plant, where compounds have to survive digestion before reaching the bloodstream, inhaling smoke sends active compounds through the lungs directly into circulation within seconds. It's fast, it's efficient, and for early humans experimenting with which plants did what to their bodies, fast and noticeable would have mattered enormously. If you're testing plants by trial and error across generations, the ones that produce an immediate, repeatable, describable effect are the ones that get remembered, shared, and eventually ritualized. Slow, subtle plants get forgotten. Tobacco does not let you forget it. But tobacco isn't the only plant in this story, and North America isn't the only continent. Roughly 10,000 kilometers away and thousands of years later, something else was happening on the other side of the world. And it involves a discovery that is, Frankly, one of the strangest archaeological finds of the last decade. In 2019, researchers examined wooden braziers, small charred incense burners, excavated from the Zhirzankal Cemetery on the Pamir Plateau in western China, roughly 2,500 years old. Using gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, techniques that can detect chemical residue invisible to the naked eye, they found something unmistakable. High concentrations of THC, the psychoactive compound in cannabis, not the low THC hemp used for fiber and rope for thousands of years prior. This was cannabis specifically selected, or possibly bred, for its psychoactive potency and then deliberately burned in an enclosed ritual context. The braziers had heated stones inside them, consistent with a method of burning plant material to produce inhalable smoke in a controlled setting rather than an open fire. This wasn't accidental exposure, this was infrastructure. Someone built a tool specifically designed to generate smoke for people to breathe in a cemetery, almost certainly as part of a funerary or spiritual ritual. And here's the detail that makes historians sit up. This lines up almost precisely with something the Greek historian Herodotus wrote, roughly a century later, describing Scythian nomads throwing cannabis onto heated stones inside small tents and, in his words, howling with pleasure at the smoke. For centuries, Herodotus's account was treated as exaggerated travel gossip, the ancient equivalent of an unreliable tourist blog. The Zhirzankal braziers essentially confirmed he was describing something real. So now, we have two completely independent smoking traditions, developing on two separate continents using two entirely different plants, tobacco in the Americas and cannabis in Central Asia, both converging on the same basic technology: controlled burning, contained inhalation, and clear evidence that the smoke itself, not just the plant, was the point. This is where it gets philosophically strange. Firemaking is one of the most universal human technologies. Every culture develops it independently. But smoking, deliberately harnessing that fire to extract and inhale a specific psychoactive compound from a specific plant, also appears to have emerged independently, multiple times, in populations that had zero contact with each other. Just like the skin pigmentation story, just like clothing, we're looking at convergent evolution again, except this time, it's not biological, it's behavioral. Different humans, different continents, different plants, same idea, arrived at separately. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Is the impulse to deliberately alter your own consciousness through inhaled smoke simply baked into how human brains work? Not a cultural quirk of one region, not a habit that spread from a single origin point and traveled the globe through trade and conquest. Possibly something closer to a universal human behavior, waiting for the right plant and the right technology to express itself, over and over, independently, whenever the conditions allowed it. There's supporting evidence for this outside of tobacco and cannabis, too. Across the ancient world, cultures burned and inhaled an enormous range of psychoactive plant material, opium poppy residue in the ancient Near East, datura species used ceremonially across parts of the Americas, various resins and barks burned in enclosed spaces from Siberia to sub-Saharan Africa. The specific plant changed depending entirely on what was locally available. The underlying behavior, take a plant, burn it, breathe the smoke, stayed remarkably consistent. Now, here's an important distinction historians are careful to draw, and it matters. Deliberate smoking for ritual, medicinal, or recreational purposes is different from habitual daily tobacco use the way we understand smoking today. The kind of repeated, dependency-forming, cigarette-style consumption that defines the modern habit is a comparatively recent phenomenon, tied closely to the industrial-scale cultivation and processing of tobacco in the last few centuries. What the Wishbone site and the Zhirzankal braziers reveal isn't evidence of ancient people smoking the way a person smokes a pack a day now. It's evidence of something more foundational. The basic behavioral template: burn plant, inhale smoke, seek the effect. Everything that came later, pipes, rolled leaves, ceremonial pipes passed in a circle, eventually paper-wrapped cigarettes, All of it is elaboration on top of a behavior that appears to be at least 12,000 years old and possibly considerably older, limited only by what evidence happens to survive and what archaeologists happen to find. And that limitation matters enormously. Charred seeds in a hearth only survive under very specific conditions. Wooden braziers with chemical residue only survive if they're buried somewhere dry enough or sealed enough to preserve organic material for thousands of years. Most evidence of ancient smoking almost certainly never survived at all. Smoke, by its very nature, disappears. It doesn't fossilize. It doesn't leave footprints. Every piece of evidence we do have is a rare accident of preservation, which means the true origin of intentional smoking is very likely older than 12,300 years. We're not looking at the beginning of the story. We're looking at the oldest surviving fragment of a much longer one, with the actual first chapter lost somewhere in the smoke. Literally, permanently, unrecoverably. So think about that the next time you see a campfire or incense or anything sending a thin curl of smoke into the air. That specific gesture, taking something that burns and deliberately breathing in what rises from it, connects you to a behavior your ancestors were already practicing before agriculture, before writing, before almost everything we consider the foundation of civilization. It's one of the oldest continuous human behaviors we can actually point to and say, we have physical proof, right? There in a fire pit in the Utah desert 12,300 years ago, someone did exactly what people are still doing today. They wanted the smoke, and they built the fire to get it. What do you think humanity found that reaction in the first place? Curiosity, ritual, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.